Hello everyone. In this video, we will be creating this scene of a falling dice. In order to create the scene, I will be showing you how to model, how to use the subdivision surface modifier. I will give an introduction to materials and lighting in the EEVEE rendering engine. And I will show you how to set up a camera and render out a final image. Let's get started. So you're going to open up Blender and you'll have a basic intro scene. From here, we're just going to get straight into modeling. When you open up the initial scene, you're going to be in object mode. And if you want to switch over to edit mode, you're going to come over to this drop-down menu where you'll see a few different options, and we're going to choose edit mode. The keyboard shortcut for that is tab. So for the duration of this video, you'll be using tab to switch into edit mode or object mode. We'll toggle the tab button. Now, once inside of the cube, we're able to make modifications to the actual mesh. So you're going to select the cube with right click, press tab, and edit your mesh selection. We have three options for editing mesh objects. We can select vertices, which are these singular points in space. We can select edges, which are these lines, and faces, which are a collection of closed edges. A useful setting that we'll be using quite often in this video is X-ray mode. You can get to X-ray mode by toggling this button here, which looks like two pieces of paper overlaid on top of each other. This allows us to see geometry that is obscured by other geometry. So I can select through the cube. I can select vertices behind faces on this object. The same goes for lines, and the same goes for faces. You can select faces. Now, when you're selecting faces, you'll want to keep in mind that in order to select a face, you're going to come close to this point, which is located in the kind of calculated center of the face. When you click near this point, it determines which face you're trying to select. If I click this one, it selects this frontmost face. If I click this dot here, it'll select the bottom face. As you continue to 3D model, you'll start to sort of automatically recognize which dots are connected to which faces. So now that we've gone through the three different selection modes, I'm going to go over object modifiers or mesh modifiers. So to get started with modeling our dice, we have a cube, and that's a pretty good start. In order to get the roundness of the edges, we're going to come over here to our properties panel here and select the modifier tab. One of the most common modifiers that you'll be using in 3D modeling is the subdivision surface modifier. I'm going to click that. Now when we go into the cube, you're going to see a cage mesh and a rendered mesh inside. A modifier is basically some collection of calculations that affect the mesh in a non-destructive way. And by non-destructive, I mean I'm not adding or subtracting vertices to make this mesh appear like a ball. This modifier is making calculations on the mesh, a Clark calculation, to add more faces to the existing collection of faces on this mesh. I'm going to set the level from 1 to 2 in the viewport, and actually I'll bump it up to 3 and render to 3 as well. So there are separate settings for the viewport level and the render level. This is just so that if you want a high level, if you want a high subdivision level on your final render, that's not going to hinder the modeling speed in your viewport. You never want to set either of these numbers to more than 3. Generally, you're going to stick to 3. Any more than that can cause a potential crash, and you don't want that. That happened to me. I did that pretty early on when I was exploring Blender. At this point, you can go ahead and save your work. Make sure that you do that fairly regularly by pressing Ctrl S. So we have a subdivision surface modifier, and it's set to 3 levels. Now when we tab into object mode, we have a sphere, and when we're in edit mode, we can see the cube cage. When we move the cage, the rendered object is modified in real time. These calculations for this modifier are modified in real time, which is great for us as modelers because we get to see what's happening to our underlying mesh. Now, if you don't like this cage view, one very useful thing that I like to do is turn on cage. That means that we get to manipulate the cage in the same way that it appears on the mesh itself. Now I'm going to toggle into orthographic mode because we're going to start modeling now. I'm pressing period so that we focus on our cube. And the first thing that we're going to do is subdivide our cube using the subdivide action. I'm going to hide these panels off to the side just so I have more workspace. You can hide the side panels by pressing T and N. So this one over here to the left is the T panel, the tool panel. And in order to subdivide, you can press W and subdivide after selecting everything. So you press A to select. You can also, if you have X-ray enabled, you can press B to box select. And I'll go ahead and show you when you do not have X-ray enabled. I'll show you what happens. So I'll box select with X-ray disabled. And notice that it only selects the front face, the front collection of vertices and not the back. And if I Alt-Z to turn on X-ray and box select again, I get the entire mesh. I get to select all of the vertices. So that's another way to select. So once you have everything selected, I'm going to press W and subdivide. Once you press subdivide, come down to this subdivision menu, and we're going to change the number of cuts to 4. So we have 4 cuts going vertically and horizontally around our cube. There are some other settings here, like the smoothness setting, that will allow you to bulge out your dice. So if that's something that you find aesthetically pleasing, you can set that to something. You can ignore these settings for now. The fractal setting is going to give you kind of wobbly vertices. This would be kind of cool for making like an ice cube or something a little bit more organic. And you can change the randomness of this action as well. But we're going to keep all of these down here set to 0 and ignore the rest of the settings. Now with that, you can close the subdivide menu and start doing more of the detailed modeling work. Now, the X-ray setting is now a bit distracting, so I'm going to toggle it off with Alt-Z so that I only have to deal with the front-facing faces. Now in this next part, we're going to define the dice dips, the dice holes. Before we do that, I'm going to back up and explain a little bit more about the subdivision surface modifier. So the subdivision surface modifier has some specific behaviors and rules. And one of the rules is if edges are closer to each other, if there's a corner, then this corner becomes more sharp. So if I in order to ring select, I hold Alt, right click, and it selects a ring of edges around our cube. You'll want to learn that later on. It's very useful action. Alt, right click to ring select. And I'll press G to grab and G again to slide along an edge. Notice that as I slide this collection of this ring of edges upwards, our top edge becomes more sharp. By sliding the edge up, we are adding more definition to the top area. As I pull the edges down, I'm decreasing the distance between rings of edges, and so we're getting a more rounded curve there. So that is just FYI. It's a bit of a heads up for some future modeling reference. As you work with the subdivision surface modifier more, you'll start to understand these behaviors better. So now that we have our subdivided cube, we're going to start defining which faces are going to be our dice divots, our dice holes. I have a reference in this window to show us which sides are adjacent to each other and which faces should have what number of divots. So if our one face is in front, this layout says that 2 will be on top. So we'll go ahead and mimic that. So 7. Shift middle mouse to pan. Shift right click to select these 2 faces. If we press 3, we're going to come over to the right side, or our cube's left side. And this should have 5 divots. So we're going to select 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'll come over here to this gizmo and swap to the other side where we should have 3. Face or 3 dots, 3 divots. And it looks like these 3, they end up in, they're going to end up facing diagonal right. Yep. Face diagonal right. And then the bottom, or the back of our cube, which is opposite the 1, is going to have 6 dots. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And the bottom will have 4. 3, 4. Remember, we're holding Shift and right-clicking to select each face. So each time you select a new face, you need to continue to hold Shift. Now that we have all of our faces selected, I'm going to press period to make sure that we're focusing on our cube, so when we swivel around, we have a good view of everything. Double checking that everything is selected. Now we're going to use the inset function to inset the selected faces. So that's going to be the I key, and that creates an inset. I'll set this inset with left click, and you want to come down here to this menu, open it up, make sure that you are selecting individual faces. If individual is not selected, then you might have some artifacts like this one. You want to select individual. And you can modify the thickness. I'm going to keep the thickness about there. You can modify the depth, though. We're not going to modify the depth just yet. We're going to use a different function to modify depth. So there are some other options here, but we'll keep our settings like this, a thickness of 0. So when you are insetting a face, you press I to inset. You left click to validate, and then this menu pops up. If you do any other action after that, you grab and set, this menu changes. It's a contextual menu. So it's going to change to move in this case. So the thing to understand is that you want to do your action, which is inset, and then immediately come down here to this menu and make your changes without clicking again or clicking on anything else. That's going to get rid of your options menu, and you don't want that. So there's that. The next thing we're going to do is an extrusion. So an extrusion creates more geometry and pulls the extruded face either out away from the original geometry, or it pulls it inside of the original geometry. After we do this function, I'll show you a little bit more about what extrude does. You're going to press space and search for extrude faces along normals, and the shortcut for that is Control F. So you can click here and begin extruding, or you can Control F and extrude along normals. And then you're going to inset just a bit until you're happy with how much of a dimple is being made on your dice. Now I'm going to Control F, extrude again along normals just to get a little bit deeper of a dip. And to define the edges of the dice a bit more. And I'm also going to come up here and I'm going to choose Transform via Individual Origins and scale these faces down. Now, I'll explain a little bit about extruding, and also I'll explain a bit about this transformation pivot point box and what these settings do. So now if we check out object mode, you can preview our modeled dice. You're going to see some visual artifacts here, and we'll change that in a moment. But first, I'm going to go over the extrude function, and I'm going to explain a little bit about this transformation pivot point menu. So extrude, you can extrude a face by pressing E. E is a shortcut. And you can see as I extrude, more geometry is being created. So I'm pressing E, left clicking to set. I'm going to Control Z. You can also do the opposite. You can create a dip with extrude. So E and pull down, and E again, E again. That created a dip. Now for this menu up here, you can transform your selected objects with different settings. So let's say I select this face and I'm going to, or let's say I select two faces and I'm going to rotate them on individual origins. Well, when I do that, these two faces, they are rotating on their individual origin points, which is in the middle, smack dab in the middle of these two faces. Shift D, I'm going to duplicate them. You can see it a little better this way. So, individual origins, rotate. Each of these faces is rotating individually. Now, if I select median point, these faces are going to rotate at the median point between the two of them. And if you press R twice, you get the swivel option. We'll be using this a little later on in the tutorial to pose our dice. But as you can see, we're choosing a median point between these two faces, and that is what is controlling the rotation there. We come up here. We can also choose active element. So the active element is the most highlighted element. It's going to have either a bright yellow or a white highlight to it. And when I press R, both of our objects, both of our faces rotate around the highlighted object. If I come up here and I choose 3D cursor, here is our 3D cursor. So when I rotate, our objects are rotating around our 3D cursor. We can set our 3D cursor to a different location. And when we rotate, our objects are going to rotate around it. If I want to reset the 3D cursor back to 0, 0, I'm going to press Shift C. And then highlight everything, press period, so that we can focus on our object again. Bounding box center is very similar to median point. And it basically looks and calculates a bounding box of these two objects, and then will allow us to transform around that object's center. So this works, this counts for rotation, transformation, and scale. Okay, so now that I've explained that, we'll move on to our model. Select these, delete all the vertices. Now, as I mentioned before, we have some visual artifacts, this kind of banding or these hard edges that you can see on the surface of your model. You want to get rid of that. And in order to do so, we're going to click into the model, toggle A, press A to select all of the faces, and we're going to Control F to go into the face menu. Again, that's Control F, and then come down here to Shade Smooth. If you ever forget a hotkey or a shortcut, you can press spacebar or come up here to menu search to give you the same pop-up. So spacebar, and I'm going to type smooth and shade smooth is right there. It's also good for, you'll also see the shortcut binding there. So make sure that you're learning your shortcut bindings. But if you ever forget, you can search by pressing spacebar. So now our cube is modeled, and we can move on to creating materials and setting up our scene for the render. So the first thing I'm going to do is come into object mode using tab. I'm going to move the cube up, or the dice up, and a little bit out of the way. And in the place where the 3D pivot point is, I'm going to create a plane. So in order to create new geometry and to put new geometry in your scene, you're going to press Shift A to add. You're going to come over to the mesh menu and add a plane. Now I'm going to go to the front view so I understand which view I'm in. I'm going to toggle into edit mode so that I can modify this plane. I'm going to come up here, make sure that I have bounding box center selected as the transform pivot point. That's going to be our default. And I'm going to scale this plane up. And you can scale it up by about 12, let's say, or 15. So I'm going to type 1.5, and that's going to get me a nice sized plane. I'm going to come over here to edge selection and select the back edge of the plane. Now I can validate that it's the back by pressing 1 or pressing 7. And then I'm going to come to the side view, press E to extrude the edge. I can type 1.5 or do an approximation. So 1.5, like that. I'll pull it up a bit more. So it doesn't need to be perfect or anything. Just make sure you're pulling it up vertically. And again, to lock to axis, you're going to start moving the edge up and then middle mouse click to lock to the Z axis, which is the blue axis, and then left click to place. So again, G to grab, middle mouse will click, move up, left click to place. You can also right click and release, middle mouse click, up, down, left click to place. There we go. Now on this object, we are also going to add a modifier. Only this time, our modifier is going to be a bevel modifier. So a bevel modifier creates extra geometry where we see two faces meet to create a sharp edge. So a 90-degree angle is enough to create a bevel where these two planes are meeting. So I'm going to change the amount by a lot, maybe 2, and then up the number of segments. And again, you're going to see some banding. I'm going to leave the segments at about 8. You're going to see some banding, but when we toggle tab into edit mode and select all and control F, shade smooth, that banding disappears. And now you can mess with the amount a bit more. You can make it smooth, or you can make a sharp edge. I'm going to say don't set this below 3. Try to select a number that's above 3, between 3 and 8. I set mine to maybe 7. Okay. So now that we have our cube and our backdrop, we're going to start on the lighting and materials. So as we get started with the rendering pass, make sure that here in the rendering properties tab, your rendering engine is set to EEVEE. First, we're going to come up here to viewport shading and click on rendered mode, which is the last bubble. And as you can see, our scene already has a light and a camera set up in it, but everything is a little bit dark and kind of dingy looking. So we're going to fix that by coming over here to world properties and setting the color all the way to white. So we just slide the color up to white, and now our world is not so dark, but we still have some shadows around to give us a sense of dimension in 3D space. So next we're going to go and create different materials for our backdrop and for our dice. And we'll start with the backdrop. So select the backdrop and come over here to the materials tab. Now you're going to press new, and this will create both a new material and a new material slot. Now there's a difference between materials and material slots. These two buttons create and destroy material slots. So this plane is going to be one color, one material. We only need one material slot. And our project has a new material, material.001, in this material slot. We're going to rename this material backdrop because it's the material that we're going to use to change the backdrop's color. Down here are the surface properties of this material. You can also preview, but we can preview over here. So I usually don't open up the preview. I choose a base color. I'm going to choose an orange. And there are other settings here, like specular and roughness, sheen, tint. I'm going to turn specular down. So specular is a reflective quality. So when I turn that up, I see more of the bouncing light from this lamp. If I hide the light, you can see what effect it's having on this backdrop. So I'm going to go to the backdrop. I'm going to turn specular all the way down because I only want the effect of the light and the color. I want to see the raw color of this backdrop. There are a lot of other settings that you can mess with, but for now, we're just going to change the specular property. Now we'll come over to our cube, tab, and our cube is going to have two materials. The first one, we'll name this one dice, and make sure that it is the material that you're changing the name to is not your backdrop material. You can put any other material into this material slot. That's important to mention. So our dice can go from dice material to backdrop material with one selection. So we're going to choose our dice material. And let's change its color to, I'm going to choose blue. You can choose any color combination that you like, anything that you find interesting. Though I'm going to say stay away from the darker colors for now. If you want to experiment in the end with your colors, then save that for a little bit later. So, but stick to these lighter colors for now. And now we also want to set a material for the dips in our dice. These little dotted divots. So we're in edit mode. We're going to select faces like this. So I'm going to face select. A shortcut for selecting these kind of faces is Alt-Shift. So Shift to multi-select, Alt to ring select. And when you select along this edge, it means the perpendicular edges, the perpendicular edge loop is going to be selected. So that if I selected, for example, this edge, like this side of an edge, then the perpendicular edge loop is that one, the band that runs all the way around the cube. So we're going to select and Shift, Alt select, Shift, right click, Shift Alt right click, Shift right click, Shift Alt right click, Shift right click, Shift Alt right click, Shift right click, until we've selected all of these faces. On our cube. Oops. If you ever unselect everything, just Control Z, you'll get your selection back. So Alt Shift, select, Alt Shift, Alt Shift, 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 Shift. Now our backdrop is getting in the way, so I'm going to Alt Z to X-ray. And Alt Shift, Shift, Alt Shift, Shift, Alt Shift, Shift, Alt Shift, Shift, and Alt Shift, Shift, Alt Shift, Control Z because I deselected by accident, Alt Shift, Shift. Now, if the plane is really getting in your way, you can right click select and H to hide it, and then select your dice again and tab back into it. and you can turn off X-ray mode. So Alt Shift, Shift, Alt Shift, Shift, Alt Shift, Shift, Alt Shift, Shift. And all right, everything is selected. So keep all of these inside faces highlighted and come over here to your materials panel. We're going to create a new material and assign it to the selected faces. So creating a new material slot here. First, we create a slot, and then we will create a new material. And the default color is white, which is fine. And now that all of the faces that we want to assign this material to are selected, we'll press Assign. So if you missed any of the faces that you want to add, you can add them at any time. So I'll press Alt, Assign. Make sure that you have the correct material selected and Assign. So I'm going to name this material Dots because it's the material that we're using for our dots. Now, I left a little ridge here where our dots are located, and this just gives us a little bit more dimension when we have some distance from our cube. If, for example, I assign this white color to the dot like that, you can't really tell. It looks almost flat. It looks almost like it's a flat plane instead of a dip. So when I leave that edge there, it gives the dot more believability, more depth. If you want to see how I got that, you can travel back into the video where I did an extra extrusion along the normal. But if you've gotten here and your cube looks just like mine, then you're good to go. So we've set up all of the materials. Now let's say we want to get our backdrop back. You're going to press Alt-H to unhide your backdrop. So far, so good. Our scene is looking pretty believable. Now let's say we want to preview our scene without all of these gizmos around. You're going to come over here to this button, Show Overlays, and toggle it. And the shortcut for that is Shift-Alt-Z. So toggle, Show Overlays. Now we're going to create a semi-transparent sort of glass jelly material for our dice. Select. I'm going to go to Control-Alt-Shift to get rid of the overlays and make sure that you have your dice material selected. You're going to come over here to where it says surface type, and we're going to change this from principal BSDF to glass BSDF. Your dice is going to change to a white color, and you can change it back to the previous color by selecting its color. Looks like nothing happened, but that's okay because we have to change a few other settings. So we're going to turn on screen space refraction. And we also need to come over here to our render properties and turn on screen space reflections. Open up that menu and toggle refractions. And now we have a pretty believable glass dice. Now I'm going to go back into the material and I'm going to change the color again. I'm liking this kind of green color. It's nice. So there are a few different settings that you can fiddle with. One is the refraction depth, and it modifies how close or how far away the opposite side of the dice, the side that's being obscured, modifies the look of that. You can also come over here to the IOR, and it will do something similar. You can get something a little bit more transparent or opaque. These numbers are sensitive, so you can keep them pretty low, between 1 and 2. You can also modify the roughness of your dice, whether you want it to look glassy or frosty. And let's see, I'm going to change my dice color to something a little cooler, a little more on the cold side. Out there. Bit of a cold blue. And again, you can choose any color combination that you like personally for your final render. Again, be sure to save along the way so that you don't lose any of your work. Now we'll be setting up the camera and lighting situation for our scene. So I'm going to enable overlays again so that I can see the lights and the camera. If somehow you do not have a light or a camera in your scene, you can Shift A and come down to this menu and add a camera or a light. The camera manipulation can be a little tricky, but what I like to do, I'll use 2 shortcuts to get my camera to where I want it to be and to set up the camera views for my scene. So the first shortcut is Control-Alt-0. Now when you do Control-Alt-0, make sure that you're in 3D mode and you're manipulating your scene in 3D mode. Control-Alt-0 snaps your camera to your current view location. So whatever you're looking at, your camera will snap to that. So let's say I'm over here and I'm like, oh, okay, I'm liking this view. I Control-Alt-0 or Command-Alt-0, and my camera is going to snap over to that view, which is great. Now let's say I like this, but I want my camera to move just a little bit more this way without having to do the shortcut again. Control-Alt-0. That can be a little taxing. So what I'll do is press N to come to this side menu and view and lock camera to view. Let's turn that on. And now when I rotate the view, the camera is locked to it. And when you're ready to, when you have a nice view established and you're happy with what you have, you're happy with what you got, you can come over here and turn that off. So that when you move your 3D viewport, again, your camera does not go along with it. If you press 0, simply press 0, you'll toggle into your camera. So camera, no camera, camera, no camera. So go back to camera again. And now I'm going to rotate my dice so that it's in a orientation that I like. So to do that, I'm going to rotate it by pressing R twice. So R, R, that's going to get you a free rotation. And I like this view here. That's nice. You can, again, set up your dice however you like. And I'm going to preview with Shift-Alt-Z to get rid of the overlays, just to see what we're working with. And this render looks pretty good. Now I'm going to show you how to change your lighting and to create a fairly simple 2-point lighting setup. So we have one light that's creating a shadow in our scene here. This one. And depending on where we place this light, our shadow is going to move along with it. Now let's say I want this light over here, maybe a little bit there. That's a nice location for it. Where the light is a little bit arbitrary. It's mostly up to your taste, like where you want this light to be. I'm gonna rotate the dice a little bit. Get the camera set up. I'm also gonna pull the camera down just a bit more because we're kind of looking at the dice from a top view. And I want this more bottom view. So I'm gonna Control-Alt-0. Yeah, that's a little nicer. And I'm gonna select the camera and move it via transformation. I can go to the edge, right click, and then G to grab. Yeah, that's pretty cool. I like this angle. All right, so we'll grab the light, bring it over, and we're going to change our light from a point light to an area light. An area light just gives us a bit more direct, like control direction with where our light is pointed. I'm gonna twist the cube just a little bit more like that. Now I have some settings for this light that I can change. I can change how much it is affecting the diffuse. I can change how much it's affecting the specular of objects. We can ignore volume for now. And we're going to set up a second light. And this light, its job is going to be to create a rim lighting effect. So we're going to pull this light behind our cube and direct it forward. I'm going to go back into our camera. And we're going to wait until we see just a bit of an edge around our cube, like a light edge about here, like that. And that gives us some interesting rim lighting. I do not want this light to create shadows, so I'll turn shadows off. Specular, we want that. And we'll turn off diffuse. Yeah, that's nice. So we turn off diffuse because I don't want this light interfering with the shadow here. So with that, we'll turn off overlays and see what we got. Now that's a pretty nice looking cube. If I zoom in, you'll notice that our render is a little grainy. So in order to fix that, I'll come up here to sampling. I'll take the viewport shading and change it from 16 to something like 32. You can even match the render, the final render, by 64. You want to keep this number low though for your viewport because you usually don't need final render quality for your viewport. It's going to allow your program to run faster and allow you to work faster. So turn that up to 32 and that looks pretty good. Now I'm going to file save. And now we'll do a render, a final render. So to get your final render, you'll come up to this output properties panel, or output properties tab in the properties panel. And you'll choose a dimension for your render. And I'm going to choose like 1080 by 1080. That's pretty nice. At 100%. So let's say I wanted to cut the resolution in half. Instead of changing this and then instead of cutting this by half and then having to rearrange my camera, I could just change the percentage here. So 50. But right now, just keep that at 100. We're not rendering an animation. We are rendering a single image. So ping is fine. You can select JPEG or any of these options here. Keep it at ping, color depth 8, compression 15%. And then when you're ready, come over here to render image or F12. And there you go. There is your final render of your dice using the EEVEE engine.